Hey, good morning. So where we were, or where we are today, is we are doing today Lamed Tes Amud Aleph. We had left off yesterday the last lines in Lamed Ches from Base. So just to again go over this, the Gemara said we are now about two-thirds of the way down on Lamed Ches Amud Base. The Gemara says the following: Amar Rav Chibar Abba Amar Rabbi Yochanan Shlagas Mevarchan Lim Bar Pred Amar Rabbi Yomi Yefes Amar Rabbi Yochanan Shlagas Mevarchan Lim Shlagas Lim Dvar. So Machlekes Shem Chibar Abba Rabbi Yomi Yefes and what Rabbi Yochanan said. Did he say that Shlagas get a hadama or a shahakal? Amar Rav Nachman Yitzchak Kava Ula Lo Shabishta Ki Rabbi Yomi Yefes. So Rav Nachman said that there was a mistake that Ula made, that he had said over the halacha from Rabbi Yomi Yefes, the name of Rabbi Yochanan. That was his assumption. And this now became this quote that Rabbi Yochanan says that Shlakas Hashahakal. And that can't be because Rabbi Chibar Abba says that it's Hadam. How could you possibly compare from Yom Yevis to Chibar Abba? Chibar Abba Dak Begom Shmaitzim Rabbi Yochanan Rabbi. Chibar Abba is very, very medayik in everything that he learns. Rabbi Yom Yevis Lo Daik. Right? Rabbi Chibar Abba called Tlos and Yom had someone to come to Rabbi Yochanan Rabbi. Rabbi Yom Yevis Lo Mahader. He goes over his learning every 30 days, or the 31st day he goes over the principles with the ritzvah attached. Bar Mendenu Lahu Termisa the Shakila Shebazin Bikter Vachile Bikinuach Seuda. This kind of termisa, this kind of lupin that they would. It was very bitter, but they would cook it 7 times and that would become very sweet, and they would use it for dessert. So and he said, of course, you make a hadam on it. Now I said I'm not really sure how this is right. It's not really edible beforehand, but either way, what it sees is that the type of shlok is where you're making a hadama. Rabbi Chibar Abba testified that he himself saw that Rabbi Yochanan ate a uzayis, meaning one olive. He ate it salted. And we say that Melech is Kirei, so it's like it's cooked, meaning it's like a shlakas example. And what do? He made a brachot chil v'soif. Yeah, especially shlakas mil sayu kaim. If you want to say that shlakas is the situation with this type of fruit or vegetable staying in the same as it was initially, then what does it mean? B'varchot chil v'soif. B'varchot bar per eight. It means that he made a bar per eight. Well, b'soif b'varchot bar brachot achas mein shalosh. But if you're going to say the shlogas are not the way they initially were, meaning that it is not any longer, it's an original state, so Bishlam But what would he make a bracha at the end? So therefore it's a raya that it had to be that shlogas are a Messiah Kaima, that you do make a hadama or her eights in this case, because it remains in the same state. The Gemara says, what's the raya? It's not a raya at all. Right, it could be that the bracha that he made was the bracha of Bar Nefashos. This is where we had gotten to yesterday. So I just thought to spend a minute, like not really only a minute. I really don't want to get into it more. I mean, I do, but I don't have time. So this idea of Rabbi Zera saying, who is he compared to Rabbi Chibar Abba? So just on that, throughout Shas, we actually had Rabbi Yefes already before here in Brachos, but throughout Shas, if you went through the whole times you see Rabbi Yefes, you're finding him 10 times. Like it's not a huge amount. You find tens of times Rabbi Chibar Abba in Brachos, tens of times. Forget Shas, just the Brachos here alone. And we have a Gemara. We had the Gemara, right? We had the Gemara. If you remember, we had the Gemara literally where Lamed Gimel and Beis, right before the Mishnah. The Gemara told us there, Amar Rab Zera, Noket Divrei Rab Chibar Abba biyadech. Take the words of Rab Chibar Abba very seriously. The Dayek v'Gomar Shmaitza mepuma demar a shapir karach for the pumadisa. Rabbi Zera said about Rab Chibar Abba that he's such a medayek. He's like Rachba Pumadisa, who is very well known for his making sure that he had a great messiah of the words that his rabbis had taught him. So we understand now. Rabbi Zera is saying, he's being tama. Like, how could it be that we have a debate about which one to go with, Rabbi Yom or Chibar Abba? There's no question. There's no question at all, given that Chibar Abba was very well known to Rabbi Zera. We have already many Gemaras here in Brachos alone where Rabbi Chibar Abba interacted with Rabbi Zera. Sometimes Rabbi Chibar Abba asked him a question we had before about he was in the mikveh, he was in the bathhouse, he said, give me 9 kabin. Rabbi Chibar Abba asked him, why is there 9 kabin? We had other Gemaras where Rabbi Zera is asking Chibar Abba. Chibar Abba davened Tushmanesh. He says, why did you daven twice? So they well knew each other. And Rabbi Zera is saying, remember, Rabbi Zera is coming from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael. We had like also already brachas that he was Rabbi Yehuda didn't want him to go, and he comes when he eventually comes to Eretz Yisrael, and he meets Rabbi Chibar Abba becomes very clearly very aware of him. He is well placed to be able to say, how could it be that Binyan Bar Yefes is a nice guy, but compared to Chibar Abba, we're not going to be able to equate it to as having a fair disputation. Therefore, it's a mistake that Ula thought Rabbi Binyan Bar Yefes was saying it over the name of Rabbi Yochanan, and therefore he took it as Rabbi Yochanan Shita. That's not correct. Chibar Abba said what is correct for Rabbi Yochanan Shita, and therefore Rabbi Yochanan Shita is that Shalakais is a Bari Piradama, not a Shahakal. Good, that's what we got to yesterday. Now, there's more to do, and that is what I would like to do. We left off yesterday. We hadn't finished the Taisus, right? We hadn't finished Mishkachas Lubatum Vikarte. We were up to it's about 2/3 of the way down in the Taisus. Taisus said Umiu Rab Alphas, right? You have it over there. The Rif Umiu. The Rif says Umiu Harif Pasak Bishlokais. The Rif is passing by Shlokais. The Afagav the Stein of the Greece. You have to use the gears of the Bach. That even though it was changed for the negative. When you're making the cooking of these vegetables, they bishulan amar ber priadama. The Rif says you make a hadama. So in other words, how's the Rif passing the halacha l'maisa on shlokres? He's saying the halacha l'maisa on shlokres you should make a ber priadama. Here Rav Nachman the amar shlokres mevarchan le ber priadama. The Rav Chibar Abba koinamik have a say. Why? Because Rav Chibar Abba holds like him. In other words, we had a machlekes in the Gemara. We had this Rav Chizda view, and then we had the Rav Nachman view. And the Gemara now just concluded by telling us that actually, what is the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan on Shlakos? It's a machlekes between Chibar Abba and Rabbi Yefes. If Rabbi Chibar Abba is correct that if he holds that it's a bar pradama, so then it's going to come out that according to Rav, Shlakos is a bar pradama, and according to Shmuel, what Shlakos is a bar pradama. And according to Rabbi Chibar Abba, what is Rabbi Yochanan's opinion on Shlagis? It's Bar Priadama. So everybody holds Bar Priadama. So the Rif says it's Bar Priadama. No matter what, it's always Bar Priadama. Even if it's what? Even if it's this Leishtan Ligrayusa. Even if it's becoming lesser. In other words, it is eaten raw, it's eaten chai, it's eaten regular, and now you've cooked it, it's still going to get a Hadama. Any types of cooked vegetables, any type of cooked vegetables. Good, clear. So according to the Rif, shlok is always a hadama, right? So remember, Tais at the beginning is mashma that he's going to hold not like Rav the Rif, right? How is Tais mashma? Tais mashma is going with Rav Chizda. Then it depends on the shlokos, right? If the type of a vegetable is one that you eat it raw, that's the normal way to eat it, to make hadam, and then shlokos are shahakal. But if it's a normal type of vegetable that you cannot eat it raw, you can only eat it when it's cooked. So then when it's raw, you make a shahakal, and when it's cooked, you make a hadama. That's what Tais Mash and Rif is disagreeing. Why is Rif disagreeing? Because Rav Chibar Abba is saying what the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. Yeah, Rabbi Yochanan, Shmuel, and Rav. Everybody says the same. So then, how is it that the Gemara? How is it that Tais will go with Rav Chizda? It must be because, as you see here, the Gemara tried to bring 4 riots to Rav Chibar Abba, right? And what did we do with the riots? The riot about the term misa. I don't understand the riot because you can't even eat it. They have to cook it 7 times. So I don't understand the riot. And the other riot, they saw Rabbi Yochanan eating his eyes melech. We understand melech kiroisech, and therefore he still made a bracha. First of all, we don't know the bracha that he made, but let's assume that he made the bracha of ha'etz. That's going to tell you that shlagis is still Messiah Kaim, and you still get ha'etz. Fine, but the Gemara is not 100% sure about this, because if it's really ha'etz, then what should he be making afterwards? He should be making afterwards a bracha main shalosh, right? He should be making a ha'etz on the zayis. If melech is resech and shlagis are Messiah Kaim, and you still make that hadam or ha'etz. Then you should make that. And the Gemara says it's not a riot because it could be made in bar nefesh. Then you made a shahakal at the beginning. So you see that the Gemara is not accepting these proofs. And we're going to see again today that the Gemara keeps on not necessarily accepting the proof that a shlagis is always a hadama or ha'etz. And therefore, I think that's what is getting the room to not agree with the way the Rif learns. Good? Okay, now we're up to the Gemara, the last line. This is new now. And back in the Gemara, in the last lines of Lamed Ches Amud Beis. Says the Gemara, Masiv Rabbi Yitzchak. So Rabbi Yitzchak asked the question. What's the question? Masiv Yitzchak Bar Shmuel. Yiragash Adam Yitzchak Meni Dechavasi Pesach. This is related to Shabbos Hagadol speech. In the years past, we discussed matzah, we discussed mar, right? Matzah requires what? Lechem Aini. What does mar require? What does Mara require? You have to have a time of Mar in the Mar, right? So says the Gemara. Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Shmuel asked the question: the types of vegetables that a person is able to be yotzes requirements on Pesach for eating more. I'm not dealing with Mar Darais Rabbanan Bisman, like none of that. Just the basic idea. Whatever yeret you need in order to be able to yotze your chayvus of eating the Mar on Pesach. Yotze behen uvekel shalen. You can be yotze with them and its stalks. In other words, the whole vegetable, whatever that vegetable is that you're using. But not if it's sort of new. What happens when you put the pickled, right? It's not when you're putting it in a liquid. And not shlukin not mushalin. I already mentioned to you yesterday. Rashi explains that mushalin is regular cooking, and shlukin is like really super cooking, right? So that it'll become nimuach. It will become to like be disintegrated. So the halacha is that you're not able to use as your marar if it was already kavush or if it was shalok or if it was mavushal, that's not allowed. And if you hold that the things are b'milsayu kaima, right? If you hold that they still remain as they are, so then why can't you use it for marar? Right? The same question we had before in relation to matzah, we're asking now in relation to marar. So this should be then a proof that shlukin are what? Shahako, right? Because clearly you can't use it. If you was a hadama still, then you'll be able to use it for mara. Says the Gemara, no, there's no raya at all that this is a situation where it's not, where you can't bring a raya that it's not been musal kaim and therefore it gets a shahako. No, shani hasan in tamar vileko. You need tamar and you don't have it when it gets shalak, when you get kavush, it no longer has the tamar. That is to say, it's not a brachas question. It's a Mar question. You want to know, are you able to eat these kind of vegetables for Mar? The shalom? No. What bracha do you make on it? Adama. Just because you're not making it for Mar doesn't mean you're not making Adama. The two are totally different halachas. So therefore, since they are totally different halachas, you cannot equate them. And therefore, as a result, we have no raya from this halacha about Marar that shlukin are in fact shahako. It could be Adama. This is where we are in the Gemara. Until now, right now, we have a story to do today, but before then, we have a kasha on a story. The story was that Rabbi Yirmiyah asked Rabbi Zera a question about Rabbi Yechon eating the zayis. If you remember, we literally had a situation like this before on Lamed Beis. Also, Rabbi Yirmiyah asked Rabbi Zera a question also about Rabbi Yochanan and what Rabbi Yochanan was doing in terms of his davening. Remember the Gemara there on Lamed Beis? We had another story. So, as we've said already many times, the stories of the rabbis are also to be darshaned, right? So the Gemara over here says, Rabbi Yirmiyah Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Yochanan, how did Rabbi Yochanan make a bracha on this olive, on this that's a pig, a salted olive, right? How did he make a bracha on it? What kind of a bracha are we talking about? We're talking about here, Rashi tries to say about a bracha achrayna. Kevin the shakli legarina, as we turn the page now to Lamates Amud Aleph. Once you took out the seed, once you took out the pit of the olive, botzer le shiura, then it's too small. So you should be able to make a bracha achrayna on it. So Amalei misavres kizayis gadol be'inan, kizayis beinani be'inan. So the response of Rabbi Zera to Rabbi Yirmiyah is, listen, why do you think here that we're talking about requirement to make a bracha achrayna needs to be zayis gadol? Just need a regular zayis. The ice of the common Rabbi Yochanan zayis gadol have, and this olive that they brought to Rabbi Yochanan was a big zayis. The Afagav, the Shankar, the Garanuse, Pashto Shira, even though they took out the pit, it was still enough of a shear that he could be able to make a bracha achrayna. Ditnan, we learned the Mishnah in Kelim, Zayis, Shamar, Lekodam, Legodal, Albein. What is the type of Zayis that we're discussing? We don't discuss here a big Zayis or a small Zayis. We talk about the Beinani Zayis, the regular kind of Zayis. Vizel Agure. This is known as an agure. Why is this different versions of what this olive is called? But we go back to the first one. Why is it called an agur? Because it's agur b'soicha. It is accumulated within it, as Rashi tells us. Look at agur b'soicha. It's like ready to come out. It's not like you have to get the juice out of it like you would in an apple or in a strawberry, where it's mamish like you have to squash it out to get the juice. But by zayas and by grapes, says Rashi, el agur kimashke anovim. It is like grapes to get the oil out of a zayas, or the wine, the grape juice out of a grape. It's much easier. I'm not such an expert in the botany, but that is seemingly very obvious. Now, we have to take a step because it's too juicy of a topic that we can't not do, especially with Pesach coming up. So pass this around. That is a picture of an egg that was found in England. It's from about 1700 odd years ago. It's a Roman egg. Take a look at that egg and see how that looks. So why is this very interesting? Because this mission in Kalim is the massive aspect of a huge sugya as to the only, like Hassam Sefer points out, the only mitzvah of achila that we have nowadays, Benat Torah, that we have to do, is eating the matzah, right, on Pesach night. So how much you have to eat? You may or may not have been in yeshivas or met people who do massive shiurim, small shiurim, big fights about shiurim. So here's we don't have a lot of time just to mention a couple of quick things. I just thought I'll point out this. There's a tshuva here from Tzitz Eliezer. Tzitz Eliezer writes about the famous tzlach. The tzlach talks about how the eggs were once, everything was way bigger. Niskatnu aderes, niskatnu everything, right? The pears, everything's much smaller nowadays. So he says that Tzitz Eliezer. This is in Siman Ayin Vav and Chelik Yud Gimel. So he says, "Kain Azkir Bezeh Benegel Devei Tzlach." Hayidu Mivsach. Everybody knows about this famous tzlach. Shoresh Lam Shashiyum V'Yichud Abeitim Shem Zmanenu Kidniskatnu. All the eggs, everything's very small nowadays. It was once huge, right? Remember the Medrash. Everybody remembers the Medrash about the spies, Eretz Yisrael. They were carrying on their shoulders, right, the one cluster of grapes. You needed people to get. Okay, fine. So says the Tzitz Eliezer, the matzah would say b'tshuvas ha'ga'onim that he found in the sefer of the tshuvas of the ga'onim as follows. And it says, "Sheheshev shel hakin natnu shir bebeitzim in Paris lefisha mitzvim tam ve'in lachash nishtanu." The reason that the Talmud always gives shiurim like a zayas or a beitz, right? These kinds of shiurim was specifically because the Paris were mitzuyim, and everyone would know exactly the size. And you didn't have to worry about it. You didn't have to go do major measurements because you want to know what's the size of an egg. Look at the egg that's being hatched. You want to know what's the size of an olive? Go pick one. Then you'll know. This is a big raya from this Chuvas HaGoinim against that tzlach. Because the Chuvas HaGoinim are saying that the reason that all these measurements were given was because Pasha, everyone knows exactly what they are. There's no question about it. There was no doubt that there wasn't a Scott knew anything. They're exactly as they always were. He found also from Rav Kook. The Rav Kook writes, "The maid of Bosh Hashaman Emona Shemotza Bezman Achron Beitzim Chanuto Eitz B'Mitzrayim, that they found mummified eggs in Egypt." So Rav Kook says they found mummified eggs in Egypt. I looked this morning just to double check, and I really couldn't do a major Google search. But if you have time, you can check. But when I did Google search mummified eggs in Egypt, I found that they do in fact have this with the royalty, with the pharaohs, but they were saying these were eggs of an ibis or an ipsis. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Kind of a bird. I didn't see chicken eggs, but Rav Kook is saying the maid of Bosh Hashaman Ne'emonim Shemotzav is Mana Achron Beitzim Chanutos from Mitzrayim Shamum Chamidin Al Pi Bechinetz Berur Shem Beitzim Tanagerlis, that they found chicken eggs, mummified chicken eggs in Egypt. For God no Kamei Beitzim Shem Zmanenu, they're no different than the eggs like that we have today. And this is a big right to the Shuvas HaGoinim from Shur Goin, etc., that the measurements have not changed at all. That is one point that I wanted to mention. The second point I wanted to mention is that the Ravya writes, right, the Ashkenazim, you want to know why we are, or should I say, some of us are more machmir in terms of these various shiurim. The Rabbi here, Masachas Brachot, is a whole thing. We didn't even get to the Taisa yet, but he says a lot of the things. The Taisa says, "V'kol heicha shetzarach kizayis, tzarach sheyiyeh meichel be'arvacha." He says, wherever we're going to use a kizayis, we have to do it be'arvacha. We have to do it be'ravchos. Why? We don't really know. We're not really experts of what a zayas is. So it shouldn't be a bracha levatala. We want to be machmer. What do you mean he wasn't the expert in a zayas? So you can understand on one level he wasn't expert in zayas the way the Slach was thinking about it, because maybe there was once huge giant zaysim and now there's smaller ones. Or you could say the pash the way the Rav Yah meant it was, why aren't we became in zaysim? No, because he lived in Germany, and what kind of olive trees do they have growing in Germany? None. None. No olive trees in Germany. Yeah. Last thing I will just mention is I was going to mention an additional point, and that was the Aruch HaShulchan. Here is the Aruch HaShulchan. The Aruch HaShulchan obliquely says like this. The meaning the Aruch HaShulchan Tav Pei Vav. Shir says Tanam Perik out the Kelm that we just quoted already before. If you do have machlokes between Rashi and everyone knows this famous machlokes Rashi and the Rambam. And what's the share of the zayis? Rashi serving the zayis uchati be'ah. Everyone knows Rashi is that a zayis is half of an egg. The Rambam says for kishlish be'ah. The Rambam holds that it's a third of an egg, meaning it's smaller according to the Rambam. For sure, when it comes to mitzvah daraisa, you should do it l'chumra in order to be yaitza all the shitas. And you should eat a amount of matzah on behalf of an egg. A morsha. When you're rabbanon, which is the rabbanon, you don't have to be so machmer. Fine. In terms of bracha achrena, we say bracha sav brachas lahaka that you don't make the bracha unless you ate at least a half an egg, meaning with the bigger shita. A person should always try to get himself out of sfegus. V'gam shir d'Rabbanan roy lahader mi shemihamitza chaviv olav. And even mashum which are d'Rabbanan, a person should try to be mahader. Whoever takes the mitzvah seriously will kaim kol hadayis and should be able to kaim all the dayis. So he's saying what does it mean to be here to all the dayis? Rashi tells the Rambam do zayas like a half an egg. So then I know that there is from the Gedalim, doesn't mention who. So they would like to double the shir, right? Because what did Slach say? Everything's much smaller. The egg today, it's really not the real size of the egg. The egg was really double, right? He says our approach is not like this. Behind is that I explain this to other places. And if someone wants to machman themselves, fine. But do not tell anybody else to do it. Remember the Gemara before we had in Brachos, Chav Beis, Yehuda was going about he was machman himself with regards to the mikvah of, but not for others. Right? He was more machman himself to be tov. Who's he obliquely referring to? I assume he's obliquely referring to the Mishnah Berurah, right? Because the Mishnah Berurah holds that since it's matzah's daraisa, yesh lechol kibeya. You should not just eat half a bear like Rashi Taitzvis. You should eat the size of a bear, right? Because everything is maybe in half, like the Tzlach wanted to say. So he probably is referring to when he says Yesh me'agadolim she'roitzim lichbal atashir. That's probably who I assume he's referring to. Although I'm not 100% for sure. Okay, so that takes care of the point about the Zaysim. Now we have to get back to our sugya, and we have no time, so let's run. Taisis, Batzlo Le Shiura. So Taisa says, "Hanu dafka b'bracha shel acharov." Taisa says, "We must be talking about the bracha afterwards, or to be in a shir. Bracha shel afan, I feel bracha to a shir. But the bracha beforehand, then of course there's no question. You don't need a shir for a bracha beforehand. Why? Because brachas before you eat something is what? Even if it's a tiny amount, you still have to what? You still have to make a bracha. There's no heter not to make a bracha if you are eating a small amount. The asal is bracha. There's nothing in this world that you're able to be having hana from in this world without making a bracha with regards to eating or drinking. But afterwards, you need a shear of malay lugma. You have to have some amount in order to be able to make a bracha achrona. Should just point out that there is one exception to that, and that is in relation to water. If you look at water, the Aruch HaShulchan, Shulchan Aruch, Reish Dalet. You look there. Somebody who's drinking water has to make a shahakol lefanav and la'achav has to make a bar nefashos. If he doesn't want to drink water, what's he drinking water? Is because the chante he has something stuck in his throat. He has some disgusting medicine. He's trying to get it down. Ain't sarch bracha loyla fun of loyla achram shadamayim ain't shum tam ain't summer. There's no taste in water if you're not absolutely thirsty. V'nachech nena mizeh av b'shari mashkin kai gav no sarch bracha lefun of la'achram techol oichle ma mashkim shanam oichle shetz refuah kol shechech nena mizeh sarch bracha tchila v'soiv kevin sheish b'zeh tam toiv. Right, so the only exception will be water if you're drinking water for something else. Right, not to actually quench your thirst. You're drinking water because you're trying to get that in medicine or to try to clear your throat. So then you don't have to make a bracha. That would not be considered anyhow. No, but otherwise, everything else is always you have to make a bracha beforehand, even on something small. But la'acharav is only if you had the right amount of shear. Says the Taisvis. If you're having a kaishal bracha, right? You're making kiddush. Right, you're doing something from a kosher bracha. You always have to have mole lugma. That's the shear. Kadesh you bracha achar, man, give him a bracha. So you have to make a bracha achar. But Riha Yami Bar Nefashis gave the bracha chashuva. He really had an approach that he said that since Bar Nefashis is not such a major kind of chashuva bracha, I feel about to mishir mevarchin Bar Nefashis rabbis. So he thought maybe even if he didn't have a shear, that he would still have to make a Bar Nefashis. Lo nira Tyson disagrees with what the Re says. The Kevin the Bar Nefashis the knua kineged ala gefen ki hechad ala gefen by shiur. It was kineged the bracha of ala gefen that they started Bar Nefashis, so then Bar Nefashis also requires Nami Bar Shiura. So first part of Taisvis is that there's absolutely a requirement on any size that you want to make eat or drink, you have to make a bracha. Afterwards, in order to make a bracha, it has to be a shear. What's a shear? Mali lugma for drinking. It has to be a shear of a what do you call of a zayis beinani when it comes to food, etc. When it comes to mitzvahs, we're talking about a zayis ben. We just had a whole discussion. We're not getting more into it. Okay, says Taisus. Rabbi Nechanan also brings down that the Yerushalmi that also brings down this story by Rabbi Yochanan has a different answer. Rabbi Yochanan Hechi Baruch Hazayis. Well, have a shear. The Yerushalmi also asks, how could it be that he can make a bracha like this? It's not a shear. V'kam mishum buried. I feel like I pray the achashal on. If I pray the achashal remind, boy, bruchim mishum de buried. Mevarchin. I feel pakas make his zayis. Right. When it comes to buried, says the Yerushalmi, when you have something kimoi shehu, then you have to make a bracha, no matter what is the size. You still have to make a bracha achreina. So the Yerushalmi is disagreeing. Says the Taisus, and you see that the Yerushalmi is disagreeing with our Gemara. Our Gemara doesn't answer that he had a smaller size, so he had a regular size. It started out with a bigger olive, and when taking out the pit, it became the size of a regular olive, and therefore it was sufficient to make a bracha. Says Yerushalmi, no, it was a tiny olive. It was still fine. Why is it considered a barrier? Look at the difference Rabbi Yah points out. We don't have time to go into now, but look at the difference between the Gemara here and the Gemara there. The Gemara here tells us the size Maliach. The Yerushalmi just says the size. Doesn't say anything about Maliach. Notice that difference. So then Tais brings down from Rabbi Yosef, Bachshin is the Girsa, that he was Mefarish Yerushalmi, Ein Chal Gal Gemara L'Shalonu. It's not a machlekes. The Achamar Shehutzer Agarim V'Nimlach and Ken L'Haya Kibri Yasai. That over here, with the talking about a situation where they took out the Garenim, they took out the pit, they took out this pit out of the olive. So if they took out the pit to make it this Maliach kind of a zayis, so it's not a berry anymore. It's not the way it grew. So that's why the Yerushalmi and the Bava don't have to be disagreeing. But the Yerushalmi is talking about a situation where it doesn't take out the pit, so therefore it's a berry, and therefore they answered differently. One's a zayis Maliach and one's a regular zayis. So it could be that the Yerushalmi and the Bavli get along, in which case that would come out lahalacha, that on if you have a grape or anything that a remine, the seed of the remine, something that is buried the way it is in its natural state, then that, according to the Shaman, that would be sufficient to make a bracha achrona, even though it's not the right amount of shear of eating. It's a smaller size. It's nevertheless will still be sufficient. Fine. So therefore, do we have two different answers in the Shaman and the Bavli? The Torah continues. It says, the very interesting part of Taisus, he asks about the Yerushalmi brings down about a termisa. Remember, we had yesterday the Mor Lamed Ches also about a termisa, right? The termisa was this lupin bean that they cook 7 times in order to be able to eat it, because then it gets sweeter. So if you had this termisa, you had this piece of lupin, right, that you're about to eat it, and it dropped from your hand, you took another one. Now, do you have to make another bracha or not? It says you have to. The Yerushalmi says you have to make another bracha. And the Gemara asks, what's the difference between that and amas hamayim? When you make a bracha on running water, right? You're going to make a bracha on running water. The water that you made a bracha on is no longer here, and yet you don't have to make another shahakol. Just keep on saying shahakol is never going to catch the amount of water until you have a cup. No, you don't have to make another bracha. So what's the difference? The Torah explains the difference is Before I mention my beers to me verse list for honey as van ich in over in circle work pa ma khair so mishani ha have died mit khilo leze sho yad shilech lahen but misa lo yad shipul mi yadai. The difference is that by the Amas Hamayim, when you're making the bracha, you knew that by the time you finish the bracha, it's going to be new water, and that's totally fine. But by the Termisa, you thought you were eating this lupin bean, you thought you were mamish eating it. So when it dropped, now you didn't have a mind on the new one. Now you have to make a new bracha. Lastly, Tais points out, and this is fundamental halacha, what everybody knows, is that when you make a bracha and it turns out that that bracha is not usable anymore, right? Because of the fact that this bean has fell down and now you're not eating it and you take a new one. So what should you do? You should say all right, continues the Gemara. Now we're going back to the Gemara before that we had about shlokas. This shlokas is shahakal radama. Says the Gemara. Let's say this is machlokes tanam. Not on church. There were these two students who were sitting in front of Bar Kapara. If you know in front of Kruv, Damascus and Pri guys, they brought in front of them Kruv, Damascus and Pri guys. What is Kruv? We had already Kruv yesterday. Kruv is a cabbage, and the Gemara said yesterday on Lamed Ches that you don't normally eat cabbage when it's chai. I don't know enough about cabbage to tell you that, but I do know that. Clearly, the Gemara felt that shlokas was the normal way to eat a kruv, and that's how you'll see in the Gemara over here. Prigais is pargiot, right? It's like chicken, and dermaskin is a machlekes, or I should say, it seems to be a machlekes. Rashi and Taisus say it can't be plums or prunes. If you look at Rashi, you'll see and Taisus the language is prunes, right? Look how it's written. It says pirish prunes. That's what he sees from Rabbeinu Yitzchak bar Rabbi Yehuda. Anyhow, if it's prunes, it challenges the whole issue because it becomes an eitz, as you'll see in a minute. But for our purposes now, there were a few students who were sitting in front of Bar Kapara, and he brought in front of them 3 different items. Again, like I told you, it's a brachas B. It's a question. What are you going to make a bracha on? Show me what you know. So Bar Kapara said one of them can make a bracha. Kavatz barach ala pargiot. So the student went and was kavatz. He made a jump to make a bracha on the chicken. Laglav Chaver says, buddy made fun of him. Caused Bar Kapara. Bar Kapara got angry. Amar le'am levarch anikais. He said, I'm not angry at the guy who made the bracha. I'm angry at the guy who made fun of him. If he's like, sound like somebody who's never tasted the taste of meat ever. That reminds us of the Gemara later on in Brachos on Samach Beis. That the Gemara tells us about Rav Kahana when he went under the bed of Rav. He said, "He never tasted a dish." So the same kind of idea when he's jumping his kafats to the chicken. He never had meat before. So the Gemara says, so he's angry at the one who made fun of him, not at the one who's mavarech. What are you making fun of him? I'm not angry at the guy who was making fun. I'm angry at the guy who's made the bracha. The fact that you're not a Tam Chacham, one thing, but you don't think there's a zuk in here? If you weren't sure what bracha to make, ask me. I'm the big stuff. You should have asked me what the bracha you should be making. So Both of them died before the year. Fine. So here's the Gemara, and what's relevant to us in our story is this: these 2 students who are clearly, not such good friends. One of them makes the bracha on the pargiot first. The other one laughs at him. What was going on? My lab must have been, what was the debate here? The mevarach savar shlokas upargiyah shahakol ni'abedvari. Now remember, we haven't used the word shlokas before, so the shlokas must be this kruv and dermaskin. Again, as Taisus and Rashi point out, if the dermaskin is a plum, it's a prune, then it will be ha'etz. So it wouldn't even be a question because obviously ha'etz would come first. So we're not talking about a prune, and it must be something that was otherwise a hadama. And the word shlokas is referring to the dermaskin and the kruv, right? The kruv, again, as we said already, the cabbage is best utilized when it's already cooked. So it says Taisves, the what do you call the mavar? So shlag is a parga shakal name is varay hilka chaviv adif. Since the shlag is the cooked vegetables and the pargiot are all shahakal, so therefore there's no kedima in the bracha. So what comes first? Chaviv, whatever you like best. This guy wants chicken, so that's what he made. I'm first on the chicken. Umalagdik savar shlok is bar priadama. And the Amar, who the other student who was laughing, he holds that shlokas is a hadama. And pargiot shahakal midvari hilkas para. So therefore you go after the para. It's a very weird lashon to say para. If we're talking about hadama, you should have said yerek. Okay, I don't really have an answer to that, but whatever it is, the shlokas are hadama. the pargiot shahako, so Hadama should come first. So therefore, the malagleg is making fun, and so therefore says the Gemara that must have been the machlekes between the malagleg and the mavarich on what is shlakis. In other words, what is the right opinion on shlakis? Is it Rav Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan according to Reb Chia bar Abba, or is it the opinion of Rabbi Yam bar Yefes or Reb Chia bar Abba, in depending on the kind of vegetable, and then you make a shahakal on shlakis? That is the Gemara until here. Says the Gemara, it's no raya from here in the story at all. Like the kulei alma shlakis pargir shahakal nebedvarai. No, everybody agrees the shlakis are shahakal and the pargir shahakal. V'hachabay svar kamiflagi marsava chavavav marsava kruvadav design. One holds that pargiot would be chaviv here, so therefore that one first. That's what the mavarich did on pargiot, and the malagleg, he was laughing at him because he said, "No, you got it wrong. Pargiot is not zayin, as we know. Meat and chicken, they don't necessarily fill you up, but the kruv has, I guess, a lot more. I don't know what the word is, fiber, carb, whatever it is. It has a lot more and able to be filling you up. So therefore, it goes first. So again, what does it come out of this Gemara? No raya from here that shlokas are bar pradama. Right? It could be, says the Gemara, that they each held that shlokas are shahago. So again, the same way as we had before, and this would come out then explaining why Tosfos felt that he could go against Reb Chia bar Abba's testimony by Rabbi Yochanan, right? Because remember, Reb Zera says Rabbi Chia bar Abba's testimony by Rabbi Yochanan. That's strong stuff. All right, so that is the Gemara, concludes the Gemara here. We're stopping to try to prove what bracha shlakos are. Continues the Gemara. Amar Ramzer, ki avinu berav huna amar lon hani gar gedilei delifta parminu prima rabba per pradama prima zuta shaklan bedvarei. So Ramzer says, when I was in Rav Huna's yeshiva, I saw that when they would be cutting the Rav Huna said that when they were cut up the turnip heads, so if they cut up the turnip heads big, right, prima rabba, then they made adama. But prima zuta, they should make a shahako. When he came to the Shiva Rabbi Yehuda, he said, no, you always make a hadama on him, even if it's big pieces, even if it's smaller pieces, it doesn't make a difference. What's the reason when they make sometimes bigger pieces is when they make smaller pieces is because they want to make it sweeter. Again, I'm not an expert enough in turnip to know, but that seems to be the debate over here. Continues the we also have to mention we mentioned about Tosfos nothing bar kapar rishus lachem and the minir demar brachot shalafanav. And as to brachot that we discussed Tosfos dermaskin, and we didn't discuss chavav adif. Okay, so just quickly the Tosfos chavav adif. Tosfos says v'chein halachim you have shtei minei peres lefanav. The halach is you have two types of fruit in front of you, chavav adif. And also next, the bar pradama adifa mishahako. Right, bar pradama is adifa mishahak. Rashi also says this. Why the muvarist fei? Because it's more specific. Shahako is very, it can go in anything. Like we saw already the Gemara earlier. And lastly, look at the last part of the Tosfos. L'fan of perisha brachas shavitz ve'echad mem nu zayin minin. Let's say you have two ha'etzes, right? But one of the ha'etzes is from the zayin minin. Yivarch chila al oises zo zayin minin adifa. That also gets more chashivas. Okay, continues the Gemara. Amar of Ashik, Avinu ber of Kahana, Amar and Tafshil the silka d'loy mafshi bekimcha ber pradam. When you have a tafshil of silka, meaning of beets, then and you didn't put in too much flour, then you make a hadama. The lifta, right? If you used it of the turnips, the mafshi bekimcha, you put in a lot of flour. Then the mafshi bekimcha tzvei bermin mezonis. Then you should make a mezonis. That's what initially Rav Ashi heard from Rav Kahana, but then Rav Kahana changed his mind. Then Rav Kahana said, no, actually, on these tafshil of the lifter, where you're putting in a lot of flour, you should still make a hadama. But the shadi b'kim chatzfei, even though you're putting in a lot of flour, is l'dvuki ba'alma avdila. You're just doing it in order to be able to attach it better, etc. It's just needed for the dish, and therefore it still gets the halacha of a ber pradama. Last Gemara for today. Amar Achiz, the tafshil shall trade in yafel aleim b'tayvel einam koshkin b'nei me'ayim. Right? What is the tafshil shall trade in? Very interesting. So Rashi says tafshil of shall trade in is the same as maya de silka. It's basically some sort of a beet soup, right? So it's good for your heart, it's good for your eyes, and it's good for your intestines. I have no idea. I'm not such an expert in beet juice, but that is what Rav Chizda says. Amar Abai, Hudi Yosef Abai Tfei, the Avid Toich Toich. Abai says that this type of beet special soup that's really delicious and it's good for your heart, your eyes, and your intestines. That's only if it's been cooked well. The oven tuch tuch. Rashi says it's making a noise of tuch tuch, meaning it's bubbling along. Amar Papa Shitli Mai the Silka Kisilka Mai the Lifta Kalifta. And here Rashi says that or Rav Papa says that it's pasha to me that the water of beets, the water of turnips, are all getting the same bracha as the beets and as the turnip. They all get hadama. Umaya the kulu shalki kikulu shalki, and the water of any vegetables gets the same bracha as the vegetables. Meaning, vegetable soup gets what bracha? Gets a hadama. Very interesting to just note that in Shulchan Aruch, when it brings down, pointing out that if you put in meat or other things into it, it would not get it. But just as pure vegetable soup, even if it's just the water. Look at Taisus. Maya the silka gesilka, mavarch and alav bar piradama. Afal pish ein ba elo maya betama yirakis mavarch alen kashar yivar kasher yivarch al yirakis. There's nothing in this water anymore except for the taste of the vegetables. It's just water that was cooked in vegetables. It'll get that thing. In other words, we're not talking about here where you take the cucumbers, or you take the turnips, or you take whatever, and you crush them and crush them and crush them, make a soup out of it. That, of course, is Adama. We're talking about water of it, but it's very interesting, and I didn't have a chance to see if anybody passes like Rashi. But look at Rashi. Rashi on Maya de Silka. Rashi doesn't say water of beets like Taisus does, right? Rashi says Maya de Silka is tafshel shel tredin. Rashi says, what is Maya de Silka? It's the same tafshel tredin. It's cooked beets. So Rashi's mashma, it's not just the water of it. So I'll leave that on the side. If Rashi's disagreeing with Taisus out there, we'll have to stop. Okay.